course, no one can ever say everywhere. But so many places of the world, migration and nationalism and populism are on the rise. And I'd like to talk about what's going on in the UK right now, both because I live in the UK and I am a subject of this empire even before I was aware that there was United Kingdom. So I'm American, as you can hear, and it's funny to talk about migration and being against migration as an American because, of course, most all of us are only there because somebody in our histories came or was brought to America. In my case, both. And equally, most importantly, the United States, the United Kingdom, I mean, the United States is so heavily populated with people who come from this very kingdom, let alone the empire. But just focus on the kingdom, on England, Wales, Ireland, Scotland. We have American traditions from these different, different communities that are from their diasporas. Like they're so visible, vibrant, powerful, and power to them. But it is to say, you can see how silly it sounds for their descendants to shut the door behind them, to have even created an angel island, for example. So the Windrush generation here in the United Kingdom is, as people are calling it, a national disgrace, a shame. It is a result of pressure put on the Home Office, which deals with migration and immigration in the UK. It had a quota. It had we have to have this many people migrating and therefore not migrating. And as this Economist article, it's just from this week and they've been reporting it on it. And I appreciate the Economist because they have this very compartmentalized way of reporting. And they don't usually get to the good stuff to the end of the article. But then they'll usually talk about two different issues, but not really, really, really excuse me, link them. UK weather, always some cough going around. And so in the first article, Identity Crisis, where they're reporting specifically about this Windrush generation and people who've been here for decades and, came here as children, grew up here, raised families, contributed in so many different ways, including to the culture of the United Kingdom, and yet they could be just swept away at the brush of a, brush of a pen. And so another article, the other article that's referred to here where they say that there's a hostile environment, they talk specifically about how citizenship applications here in the UK are subject to something called tightening of the rules. So the passports have plummeted since 2012. And the reason, there's some discrepancy or discretionary power on behalf of who you happen to be applying with to say that you're of bad character. Now, what is bad character? Well, like I said, it's up to the immigration officer that you happen to be facing at the time of your application. So it's really like, it's not even like a lottery. It's like really the luck of the draw. And so notorious in their local or the wider community. These are some of the reasons. There was a Botswanan who had served in the British Army but failed the character test because he had broken a speed limit on a motorway. That decision was later overturned. But it's stuff like that where individuals are called upon to fight for their rights. And it's not normal in the sense that we, of course, appreciate first and foremost the liberty that we have to fight for our rights. In America, it's the very First Amendment. Often it's the one that's ignored by the people who are using it. But, it's crucial that you can say, I have the right to do this. I have the right to be here. And free speech is how we get to know about these people. But what happens when they're crushed in the system or crushed by the paperwork, as is what happened to many people in the Windrush? And I know people whose parents came here in that generation, and they are just heartbroken from how this has turned out. Now, I want to raise this because not just the hypocrisy of a community closing its doors to others when they have been welcomed other places. And so, this kingdom has benefited from America having wide doors open to its citizens. But equally, the way that the empire, the fact that there is a British Empire, the fact that there is a British Commonwealth, and so all those nations who have had to deal with, put up with British people, it's another reason why we're like, what is this really about? And finally, why I appreciate The Economist for reporting about this is because they will really only ever look at the fact that there is implicit bias behind it. There's implicit racialing or racialization of the other, be it a religious other, a so-called racial other, an ethnic other. There's this constant othering, and you see it, of course, within the United Kingdom itself, the othering of the Irish, the othering of the Scottish, and everyone's vying for who is a Brit. Normal. Is it just the English people? We all speak English. But this always leads to this hostile climate because it has a hostile intent underneath it. And I'll just give you one example. I was recently speaking with a person who is in my environment who's white, and they were describing an incident where some member of the public had done something bad, and they wanted to tell them, hey, you've done this bad thing. And retelling the story, this white person recapped this person's religion, consequently race, and gender. And after listening to the story, I asked very carefully and non-accusatorily as I could, what did the person want to convey by telling us the person's race, religion, and gender? And immediately the walls went up. I'm not racist, and the person didn't say, how dare you call me a racist or accuse me of that. But the person certainly responded to charges of racism when the question was, what did you want us to know? Now, obviously, I have a vested interest in this. I'm a person who is a visible minority in several ways. And, by my race, my gender identity. And so I'm often curious when people say, look, or remember that guy. Well, what did they say, that guy? Because as you know, and you see that all through the reporting, as a so-called normal person, you have to be described some way. So, for example, in The Economist, if you're white or if you're male, it's never referred to, and certainly your class. But if you are poor, it's mentioned that you're poor. If you are female, it's often, usually specifically, not just that we use she or her, but that they specifically mention the person's gender. And certainly if that person is a person of color, they're outed as a person of color. And so the box standard person becomes white, male, upper class, and everyone else is a transgression from that. And so I've often wondered, like when I walk down the street and I'm like, oh, look, there's that neighbor who's walking down the street. What do you say? Like, there's that guy, the tall guy, the short guy, the big guy, the short, how do you do it? And this is why labels become so important, because they do convey implicit messages. So when you say, hey, there's that black guy, it does mean that you are called upon to think about what are you conveying, or what do you want to convey just by using the adjective. Because it does convey something. It does say something. If I say Muslim, veil, like you have ideas about this just wearing a veil, or being a Muslim, or being a Muslim woman. Or if I say gay, or poor, or rich person, like all of these identities convey different social meanings. They are represented in different ways in our culture and even in our minds. And as I said, the rich, the white, and the male are invisible. And even when we're not rich, white, and male, we see them as normal and ourselves as the transgression. And that's the internalized bit that becomes so difficult to talk about, because it says that we internalize racism, perpetuate racism, sexualism, forms of social hierarchy, but it doesn't let the majority, the dominant culture, off the hook for privilege, for benefit, and for using its privilege and benefit to tackle the system itself. And it's so deep that, again, even in our everyday language, we reinforce difference and hierarchy. And as social deconstruction has said, all of them, from Lacan to you could go on and on and on. There's the idea that we just can't see difference. When we see difference as humans, we immediately start thinking about hierarchy, privilege, who's higher, who's lower. And for many, like Foucault, it's that dominant submission. Like who's going to dominate, who's going to submit in this relationship between two different people who are maybe just different personalities, but they do the power play. And then if you add any social differences amongst them, gender, perceived class, race, religion, then there's the hierarchy starts to build. And that's what I'd like for us to call into question, both in our media reporting and our everyday conversations, but equally, and when we think about politics, economics, public life in general, representation, pop culture, that we don't shy away from talking about social difference. You know, there is a XYZ person, but that we accept that there is going to be some pushback, or there's going to be some inquisitiveness about what do we differently understand about these social identities. And I think that we have to be open to the discussion.